Can you remind me? Oh, it's live. We're live now. Oh, okay. Thanks so much for joining, everybody. We used to do Facebook Lives a lot during the pandemic, and then we have it, and we lost practice. Thanks so much for joining, for tuning in, and then this will be recorded, so folks will be able to come in and tune in at different times as well. So my name's Ide, and I'm an organizer with the Resurrection Project, and I work on immigrant rights. And today we're going to be talking about how we believe we can create a path to make sure that all immigrants are able to obtain work authorization with a particular focus on the long-term undocumented community. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We do have a presentation to show you. Just give us 1 minute. Okay. So the path that we believe that we could utilize to expand work authorization for the undocumented is parole. So let's start talking a little bit about what parole is. So parole it's an existing law, and basically what it is permission to be within the U.S. And I want to talk about some examples that you may be well aware of. So one example is temporary parole. So folks are sort of paroled into the U.S. and then and it's very short. And during that time period, basically folks are if folks are able to stay within the U.S. for a short period of time. And for many people, what had been being used at the border was they were paroled in and then were allowed to apply for asylum, for instance, right? Parole in Place is a program that many of us are familiar with. Parole in Place is for undocumented immigrants whose spouse or U.S. citizen child, so U.S. citizen spouse or U.S. citizen child, is a member of the military. So the reason why this parole in place exists is because there's two ways generally of being undocumented. So one way is you come in through a visa. Maybe it's a tourist visa, maybe it's a student visa, maybe it's just a temporary work visa, and then you overstay your visa. That's one way of being undocumented, and that's about 40% of the undocumented community. The other way of being undocumented is what's known as entry without inspection, or you cross the border, right? Or for short, that's called EWI. And so what ends up happening is that, let's say there's two people, exact same scenarios, and maybe they came in when they were 15 years old, and then once they're 25 years old, they marry a U.S. citizen, and they both want to adjust their status, right? They both want their U.S. citizen family member to petition for them to be able to adjust, to be able to get a green card. In the case of the person that came in with a tourist visa and overstayed their visa, the U.S. citizen is able to, petition their relative, their spouse, for adjustment of status. And if everything's okay, then that person is going to get a green card in about 6 months to a year. In the case for people that came in EWI, or entry without inspection, what that means is that they actually are not able to adjust their status in many cases, or in most cases, really. Because what has to happen is that this individual needs to leave the country in order to finalize their application. When an undocumented person leaves the country, they have a 10-year ban of coming back. So what has happened is that particularly for immigrant communities that cross a border, right? So we're thinking a lot of folks from Mexico, Central America. They're sort of stuck in this permanent undocumented situation because even when they marry a U.S. citizen, or even when they have U.S. citizen children that turn 21, that U.S. citizen is not able to petition for them. So in the case of parole in place, what it allows the iwi person, right, the immigrant without inspection, to do is to put in an application for parole in place. That parole in place can get approved, and then that person can solicit their work authorization. And then that individual, eventually their family member, can sponsor them. So that parole basically serves as protection from having to leave the country and triggering that 10-year ban. So parole in place is a really good program. However, it is only for people whose spouses or U.S. citizen children are a member of the military. So that's an example of how parole has been utilized in a very limited case-by-case basis. And occasionally, right, USCIS can parole folks simply because it has the authority to do so. When somebody has parole, they can request work authorization that is valid for the duration of that parole. So if your parole is granted for 2 years, you're able to get work authorization for 2 years. If your parole is granted for 5 years, you can get parole for 5 years. And traditionally, parole is granted on a case-by-case basis and very limited. So we're going to talk a little bit about that's traditionally has been utilized that way. In a little bit, we're going to talk about how it's being utilized currently. So we'll go to the next slide. So why is it that we're advocating for parole for the long-term undocumented? One, parole is already a law. It already exists in statute. There's no need to change the law. And that means we have one target, which is the Biden administration. And so, like I said, right, we normally parole has been done on a very limited basis. But what we have seen is that the Biden administration has granted parole to now more than 1 million new immigrants from certain countries. And so those immigrants are able to apply for work permits. So a lot of the times when we think about what is the immigration policy that we would love to see in one day, it's that folks would be able to enter the country and be able to apply for work authorization without the need to necessarily have a family member or wait those 25 years for their family member to be able to come in, or have one of those special visas like H-1B visas. But we really do believe that immigrants should be able to come to the country and be able to apply for work authorization. So in essence, the Biden administration has been doing this. And that's a good thing. I think we're realizing that there has been a lack of doing this fairly, right? One, it has not been open to the undocumented community who have been working without work authorization for 10, 20, 30, and now almost 40 years. And two, it's being rolled out in many cases because of due to nationality versus kind of any other need. And so that's really affecting some communities that has historically been trying to immigrate to the U.S. And parole can be granted for one of two reasons. The first reason can be humanitarian, and the second can be if it's a significant benefit to the state. So what we've seen in the programs that the Biden administration has stood up is that it's been using humanitarian reasons. When it first stood its first program up, it was for Ukraine. There was a war. And so sort of using that humanitarian reason was very clear. The second time that it used parole widely was when there was a withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so it quickly needed a mechanism to allow Afghan nationals to come in. Both very good programs. The Ukrainian much better because the Congress passed an act that allowed Ukrainians then to be able to adjust. And then the Biden administration utilized similar parole programs for Venezuela, Nicaragua, Haiti, Ecuador, Cuba. And so what we've realized is, and then in all of these instances, some of them have been the humanitarian reason have been, for instance, for family reunification. And although we believe in family reunification, we believe that's humanitarian, there are many people who have been waiting to be reunited with their families from across the country. And in some cases have been waiting much longer than like the 5-year wait periods in some of these countries. The second thing about only utilizing it for specific countries and only utilizing it for new immigrants is that the undocumented continue to not be able to get any work authorization, and this includes undocumented dreamers who continue to graduate from high school, who continue to graduate from college, and who have right now no path towards legalization or towards work authorization. The second reason is if it's a significant benefit to the state. This second reason has not been used. It's no different than humanitarian. It's not like humanitarian has a whole lot more examples of how we could do so. Both of them are very short in the side of the legal language, but it just hasn't been used to be able to grant parole. And I will say, though, that 3 years ago, humanitarian had not been used to grant mass parole the way that it has been as of late. Go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between parole and TPS, because we hear a lot about TPS, right? So TPS is designated by country. And the administration needs to prove that there are very dire circumstances in a country in which it would make it very difficult to deport nationals from that particular country. And so therefore it designates temporary protective status. During TPS, folks are able to apply for work authorization. So those things are similar. And then TPS, actually, folks are able to travel abroad and come back into the country. And then, like, as I mentioned, although the new mass parole programs that the Biden administration have been standing up have been by country, it is not necessary to designate by country. What the other thing that they do have in common is that they are both administrative, meaning that there is no need to change the federal law. It is within the administration's power to be able to do this change. Go to the next slide. So how do we envision a parole program working? First of all, it's actually fairly simple in how it can designate how parole would be allocated or would be distributed, or how people would qualify for parole, right? And we know that it's actually fairly simple because, as we mentioned, the Biden administration has rolled out 5 or 6 new mass parole programs in the last 3 years, and it would basically follow the same rules, which is publish rules in the federal registry, and then set up what the process is for people to apply, who qualifies, and how people would apply. So right now, the way that the programs are working is that folks apply for parole outside of the U.S. We are calling for the administration to use parole in place so folks could qualify for being able to request parole already inside of the U.S. And as we mentioned before, when people are paroled, they're able to apply for work authorization for the time of their parole. Go to the next. So I want to talk a little bit about what the role of the state could be. We don't exactly know this, but we are advocating, right, for the state, given that there's 2 reasons. Right, there's 2 reasons why the federal administration can grant parole. One is humanitarian. The second is if it's a significant benefit to the state, right? So we are calling on the state of Illinois to codify that granting parole to its undocumented immigrants is a significant public benefit. We believe that this could set up the federal government to be responsive we are calling on the federal government ultimately to open up a parole and work authorization program. And so it ultimately is up to the federal government to do this, in particular, any administration that is in office. But we believe that there's a role that the state could play. And we believe that there's a role that our local governments could play, right? Because just as local governments are advocating for recent arrivals to get work authorization, we need our local government to be advocating for the long-term undocumented to get work authorization. And we're calling on the state to pass a law to really codify this and use it as a tool to advocate for the long-term undocumented community. We know that it is a significant public benefit to the state to give work authorization to its undocumented population, because that means more people would be in the regular workforce and would probably have access to better paying jobs, which means higher wages, which means more tax revenue for the state. It means people would have more access to benefits, which means that less people need state-assisted healthcare, for instance, or services. We know that right now, undocumented children can go to school, they can go up to high school, they can go to college, and in college can receive assistance to be able to pay. But then the moment that they graduate, they're barred from getting a lot of jobs, given that they don't have any work authorization. We know that it is a significant benefit to the state to protect its workers. Some of the most exploitable workers are undocumented workers. That means lost wages. That means that they're doing dangerous jobs. That means that they have a harder time unionizing. And if we want to protect our workers, we can expand work authorization to the undocumented. And that is a significant benefit to the state. And so we believe that our local government can do a lot more than it's been doing to advocate for the undocumented at the federal level. We need to see that our local elected are going to the White House, to those meetings, and also advocating for the undocumented community who have been working without work authorization for dozens of years. We can go to the next. So I just want to very quickly talk a little bit about why we're asking for parole, and what does that mean for immigration reform generally, and potentially a pathway to citizenship or a larger larger legalization program. The main reason is because in order to pass immigration reform, we need to pass immigration reform in Congress. Meaning we need to get enough votes in the House, and we need the Speaker of the House to call a vote in the House. In the Senate, we know we need to get to 60 votes. We cannot only get to 51 votes. We actually need to get 60 votes in order to pass anything in the Senate. And I think, last week we saw one of the toughest, harshest immigration bills put forward, and even that bill could not get 60 votes in the Senate. So passing anything right now in Congress in such a divided time is going to be a challenge. And so that's the biggest reason. The second reason is because we're ultimately seeing that the Biden administration has recognized that it has parole authority and has been using its parole authority widely, and it has deliberately chosen not to use it for the undocumented community. And so we need to do our work to make sure that we are targeting somebody who does have wide authority to grant work authorization, and not let the Biden administration off the hook. Go to the next. So, inviting you, everybody, to take action, to stay involved. Please follow the Resurrection Project on social media to hear about call to actions. And there will be. We've had vigils. We've gone to DC. We will have rallies. We will be visiting the state capitol to advocate for a bill that would establish significant public benefit. We want to make sure that folks are engaged, and that we are advocating for the long-term undocumented as we continue to assist and help the new immigrant arrivals, who in many cases, some do qualify for work authorization, and also help folks resettle, right? But we need to continue our advocacy work for the undocumented community. So we're asking folks to follow us on social media, and stay up to date with actions that will be coming up. So we're gonna open it up. If there's any questions, you can put it on the chat. If not, we are going to get back on Facebook Live at 6:15 to do the same presentation in Spanish and have a conversation in Spanish as well. So thanks so much for joining. We're going to be doing some more Facebook Lives with this information, and to make sure that we're updating folks. Please make sure you follow Resurrection Project on social media. We're on Facebook, we're on TikTok, and we're on Instagram. Thank you so much.